So, as I said, welcome everybody, and my name is Leslie Calverley. I am the Senior Commissioner for SEND within Staffordshire, and I have with me a couple of my colleagues, Karen Withington, who's supporting me as the project manager on this, and Nicole Hogan, who supports me in commissioning team, who will be supporting the FAQ at the end of it. If we do run out of time, we will be posting the questions that you ask at the end of the session and creating an FAQ for you all, and we will be putting the recording of this session onto our local offer at some point so that people can go back and take a look at it. So what we hope to cover in this session is an introduction to the banding tool, giving you an overview of it. We'd like to introduce Imosphere, the company who created the banding tool, so they're with us today. And they will give a description about what it consists of, how they've developed it, and some key features and benefits that hopefully you will understand why it's something that we wish to bring into Staffordshire. We've already started to work on a plan of how we will introduce it across Staffordshire, so we wanted to share that with you. And during the period of that support, then Imosphere will be with us throughout that period, supporting us. And again, we'll share what that support looks like for us. And also about how we will track the progress of this project, about what the governance structure that we've set up and how we'll communicate with you moving forward. And as I said, we have got the opportunity for you to ask questions, so please put it into the chat and we can pick those up. Sorry, somebody else coming in. So as an introduction and overview from myself, it is a single algorithm that the banding tool consists of, which basically calculates the education element of a pupil's EHCP top-up funding. So it does not cover the health aspect or the social care aspect of a education, health and care plan. It aims to provide a fair and equitable and consistent formula of funding. So therefore, we have a consistent approach across all top-ups of all our EHCPs. That is what our aim is to achieve. And therefore, we are planning to implement this across all mainstream schools, special schools, PRUs, and FE. So it is about the needs-led rather than being provision-led based top-up funding. So it uses what the needs of the child are as identified within their EHCP and links it to what the outcomes we have identified in the plan, and then attaching the appropriate funding so that you as school providers can deliver those outcomes. So it is not about reducing funding. The key thing is about ensuring that it's a fair and equitable across the system of education. It will remove that need for individually negotiated top-up funding that we currently have with providers, and it will therefore remove any current inconsistency that we have across the sectors as well. So I'm going to hand over to Natalie now, who I didn't introduce at the beginning of the meeting. Hopefully she's there and put her camera on. Apologies, I didn't have my camera on for that, so I do apologise for that. I seem to have turned my own camera off and I didn't mean to, so I am here, everybody. So I'll hand over to Natalie, who's going to take you through some key aspects of banding tool now. Natalie?
Thanks, Leslie. So hi, I'm Natalie Kennison and I'm Chief Operating Officer at Imosphere. And firstly, I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction about who Imosphere are and the team before we start talking a little bit about the tool. So Imosphere have been about for approximately 25 years, and all of our tools are really based on wanting to capture the right information at the right time to make good decisions, and ultimately so those decisions can improve outcomes and lives for people. Our tools are used across the UK. We've got a variety of types of tools. We've got assessment tools, analytics tools, data capture tools, our Formulate products and education banding tool. And they're used across the UK, Scotland, Wales, Ireland and Jersey. But for the last 10 to 12 years, really, we've been very focused on providing tools that help allocate money in a really fair and consistent way, rather than just being who shouts the loudest. which is what we've seen in some places. So we've been working in education for the last 5 years, and we got bought into it by our customers really when the Children and Families Act came out. We've been working with children in advance of that, and they wanted us to help create something that was fair and equitable for their education teams, because they'd seen the benefit in social care. So that's where we kind of started within education. But we've been working with children's health and social care for a very long time. I mentioned we've been working with local authorities kind of across the UK, but we've actually been working with Staffordshire County Council in the adult social care team for about, I think we're coming up to our 10-year anniversary now. So and I know most of the team that are working on this project have also worked with Staffordshire and have really enjoyed it. So I think we're quite excited to be working with Staffordshire again on this project. And because Leslie is controlling the slides, I have to do next slide, please, in my Chris Whitty accent. But I'm not very good at impersonating him, so apologies. Thank you. So I just wanted to give a little brief introduction to the main people that are going to be working on this project. So Izzy is our solutions consultant, and she's going to be the day-to-day contact supporting the activity that's going on in Staffordshire, but also making sure that all of the Imosphere tasks and activity are underway as well. So we stay on track with the project plan that we've pulled together. Rob is the product manager for Formulate and the education banding tool. And he will be seen around the sort of configuration time, supporting with that, but also listening to sort of improvements that might be made to the products so that people can get the best from them. And then you've got Kieran, who is the delivery team manager, and she oversees all of the UK projects. So she'll often be popping up maybe to help out with some of the other bits of work when Izzy's on leave, other types of activity like that. And then finally, there's myself as Chief Operating Officer. I'll be keeping in contact with Leslie and the project lead just to make sure everything's kind of going to plan, whether there's anything that people need, anything more we could improve and be working on and thinking about the future of the tool. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to do a bit of a brief introduction about what the education banding tool consists of, because I think that's the first thing to get straight in our minds. So when we talk about the needs profile, which I will do in a little bit more detail in a moment, what we're talking about is the set of questions and the answer selections in there that the local authorities send key workers will be completing, usually at the time of annual review or as a new EHCP is requested. But it is the set of questions ultimately that are being answered, that information that we're capturing. Leslie's already briefly covered this, but behind that sits the algorithm, and really what that is the decisions that Staffordshire will be making once those answers are completed. And there'll be different ways that can be set up, and that information is going to come out of the data collection phase. So that's the model that sits behind. It uses those answers that have been inputted into the needs profile with the Staffordshire decisions to come up with the education band. And then finally, it's the digital platform, which is where the needs profile is completed, so where they're actually going to be doing it. And that will be currently on CareCalc. That's an Imosphere tool. I mentioned in one of the slides before, we try to make things as digital as possible. So we've got our CareCalc tool, which is a very simple web-based tool, which we're planning to use for the first couple of years. And then it may be built into perhaps another system that Staffordshire are using. Next slide, please. So education banding tool, just wanted to give a little bit of a summary about the sorts of questions that are on that tool and the sorts of information that will be being collected. So there's about 14 main questions on this tool, each of them with a scale drop down. So it isn't inputting extra text, it's to be done alongside annual reviews and EHC plans. And it's all about looking at the areas within the education sector that we want people to be doing well in, succeeding in life for these young people. So there's questions about communicating well, achieving the potential for learning. So that's really accessing the curriculum and overcoming any barriers that may come up through that. Forming positive relationships, whether that's with peers or other adults in the education setting, and enjoying sort of recreation activities. Then we've got questions that go on to talk about maintaining emotional well-being and looking at whether that's a strength for the individual or something that needs support. And then it moves into talking about how the young person deals with change, because we want people to be able to deal successfully with change. And change is happening constantly through the school day, as we're all aware, whether that's moving from doing a carpet-based activity, story time, to doing something at the desks, to doing something slightly different like PE or drama, and then moving throughout those different timetabled aspects through the day, like lunchtime and ending school. And then it goes into talk about questions about self-care, so all those extra things that go on at school, like eating, drinking, getting changed for PE, drama, toileting, all those everyday activities that have to be looked into, alongside mobility, so being able to be independent moving around the school and what support might be needed with that. So once those areas are taken into consideration, it then goes to look at managing behaviour and risk. So there's a question that asks about whether there's any, what sort of concerns there are about behaviour, again, whether it's a strength, it might be, and then the risk that is associated with. So what's the likelihood of something happening of harm to themselves, to other people, to property? And the scale that works on is starts at unlikely to a strong but predictable likelihood. And obviously, if it's a strong but unpredictable likelihood, there's a lot of risk there, because we can't predict when it's likely to happen. And then the most recent bit we've added on is the preparing for adulthood section, which is taken from that section of the Code of Practice, where we're asking questions about what support they might need to be independent with their daily lives. So being able to prepare meals, look after their kind of paperwork and finances, that side of things, to travelling independently, and then being ready for employment at the end of that. And each of these have a scale, so it's a drop down that people will choose. Next slide, please. So once that information's been input into CareCalc, they'll press submit, and that will then hit the decisions that Staffordshire will have made with the configuration. And there's lots of options that they can do around this, and all these questions will kind of be answered as we go through the process of the implementation once we've done the data collection. And we'll make decisions about whether or not there needs to be configuration by age, education setting, and what that might look like. But ultimately, it will provide back an annual budget based on that band, based on the needs that have been entered and the decisions that Staffordshire have made behind in the model. There are options here that you could have a range rather than an actual set amount, or that each band could be slightly graduated. So you could have, for example, as it says here, 8C, so you could have an 8A, an 8B, and 8C, and have slightly increases each time. And then to provide some transparency about how that band came about, it kind of explains where the baseline band, how the baseline band had come to be that number, and then whether there were any increases added on because of risk or sensory impairment. It also has the education level as an additional output, and the option to show what the equivalent might have been in education support hours. And these outputs will be decided as part of the process, which ones they want to show, which ones are relevant, and that will be a decision that's taken through this journey that we go on together. And then at the end, it's also got the opportunity to kind of capture what that final band decision was, in case there was a reason that the band that wasn't used, that came up wasn't used, so we can make sure that it's working for the future. So there's a sort of opportunity to capture that final band decision to make sure the system's working as well as it can. Next slide, please. So I know I briefly touched on it earlier about how a few of our customers had come to us when the Children and Families Act came out, saying they wanted something that would support sort of fair and consistent approach to allocating top-up funding. And it was really about having a needs-led, individualised budget in a tool that ideally something digital and could be quite transparent. So that's where we started, and to do that we had to look at thousands of cases. So we worked with quite a few sites. We looked at what statements of need that were being converted into EHCPs at the time, to try and establish the things that were influencing high levels of top-up funding being given. Obviously, that was very much to do with sometimes the school. A lot of it was to do with risk. But getting an understanding of the sorts of questions we wanted to be asking without duplicating information that people have already captured elsewhere, and not making it an onerous task. So that was something that was really, really important for us. While we were doing this development phase, which took a couple of years, we spent a lot of time talking to educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, physiotherapists, SENCOs, head teachers, caseworkers, but also parents as well, to make sure that once we'd established what domains we were looking at, that the wording was right, the descriptions were coming out in the right sort of way. So I keep hearing all the buzzing from the chat on the side, so sorry if I'll try and stay focused, sorry. So we were talking about these to make sure that the wording was right, but each site might want to change the wording on some of the assessment guidance a little bit more, to make it a little bit more bespoke for that local authority. So I just wanted to give you a little flavour of some of the things that happened during this development time. And one of the things was that one of the sites wanted to try 2 different approaches and test it out on some head teachers. And I know we've got lots of head teachers here today. So we did a blind test, and they couldn't tell which tool was which. It was just called test 1, test 2, and they brought some cases along and they filled them in. And 7 out of 8 of the head teachers came along and said, actually, yeah, they did prefer the IMOsphere approach and the separation of the domains, because what it enabled them to see was where there's likely to be improvements. Let's say that the young person's been really successful in some of their outcomes about maintaining their emotional well-being, but perhaps some other ones maybe haven't gone as well, and maybe the needs have increased, perhaps around the communicating well section. So it was able to sort of differentiate all those different areas and being able to sort of think about successes as well as the areas that needed to be reviewed again, and think about maybe a different set of provision. So as part of that, we're always kind of listening to what our customers are wanting, thinking about the future. So looking at ways to improve the tool, try and bring our local authorities together to review what potential changes we want to make. If there are things that we can do to enhance it, maybe there's things we can be doing with the data to help in the future. So that's very much something we're looking to do all the time, is keep developing it, not in a way that drastically changes it once it's kind of gone live, but just to keep it really best practice and fit for purpose as things change, because things do. Next slide, please. So I just want to reflect on some of the sort of key features and benefits of the tool, and I've touched on a few of them already. But the idea is that people wanted the same tool for all children and young people, but configured kind of as required. So rather than having one tool for mainstream, one tool for special schools, one tool for pupil referral units, having one single tool that covers all of them, but the configuration behind it, the decisions that sit behind it, are different depending on the education setting, perhaps the ages as well. We wanted to have something that examines risk and the impact that has on funding, because we saw in the majority of the cases that had such a huge impact. Having something that really specifically looks at that and understanding that impact is really important. Both myself and Leslie have kind of covered this already, but about having something that's needs-based rather than provision-led, and which was really important, especially after the Children and Families Act came out. And ultimately, people did want something that could support the rollout of personal budgets. We've not seen a lot of personal budgets coming out of education in a lot of the sites we've been working at, but it is there and available to help with that, and that was sort of the purpose, having that fair approach. That tracking changing needs over time, I kind of briefly talked about it when I was talking about the head teachers trying out the tool. But being able to see which needs are increasing and which ones are increasing, which ones are staying the same, tracking that change over time is a really valuable aspect that our customers talk to us about. And then providing that justifiable decision making, so being able to understand exactly how we came up with that band, and being able to talk and be able to show that in a transparent way. I mentioned that our preparing for adulthood section It's relatively new, but we really want to support that, so because we know that local authorities really want to be thinking about that much earlier and having the opportunity to start identifying their needs and the support that might be required to be able to support those young people as they move into further and in some cases higher education as well. And then really it's about having a tool that is sort of jointly owned by yourself and us to keep it up to date, so making sure that each band's got the right amount of money each year, sharing that knowledge from each other about best things that are working with processes, the way the tool works, anything we could be doing extra with, if we need to capture some other information, and working in a partnership to kind of get have ongoing developments to get the best from that tool as it possibly can be. And our whole kind of mantra around this is about it being fair, accurate, consistent, equitable and sustainable, and that's kind of what we live by, really, is this kind of statement here. Next slide, please, Leslie. So just to talk a little bit about how it's proposed to work in Staffordshire, Leslie's kind of covered this in the introduction, but we are expecting to kind of implement it across all sectors of education, so mainstream, special, pupil referral units, further education. And the idea is that the Staffordshire Send key workers would complete the needs profile at the point of drafting a new EHCP or at an annual review where there's been a significant change in need. And as I've mentioned, this data collection phase, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, is really where we're going to start getting a lot of answers to the questions about what this is going to look like for Staffordshire, because we'll be establishing what we'll be doing as part of the data collection is running cases through it without any money being allocated, seeing the bands that are coming out, the current level of current funding levels for each of these bands, and getting an idea as to what the configuration needs to look like or what investigation work we need to do to establish that configuration for Staffordshire. And I know that we're really keen here that that everything's kind of shared out with the implementation reference group. And then obviously we'll be working with Schools Forum as well for consultation. Next slide, please. So I need to thank.
You've just put yourself on mute, Natalie. I don't know.
Oh, I got a notification that someone had muted me. So I just need to say thank you for Karen for pulling this slide together, because she's made this much more visual than what I had. So thank you very much, Karen, for doing that. This just kind of outlines the main steps. There's a huge project plan that sits behind this that Karen's kind of maintaining. And this outlines the key elements that we're going to be working on. So at the moment, we're obviously sort of the project setup element and the launch, which is today. Very exciting. And we're going to move after this into the data collection phase. And what that is going to be is it's going to be the SEND key workers completing this alongside annual reviews and EHCP, the new EHCPs that are coming through, as a sort of desktop exercise to start capturing which bands young people are falling into, and using that information to move into the financial modelling and configuration section of the project. Alongside that, we'll obviously be reviewing internal processes, because there are quite a few processes that need to be reviewed. As we go through this project, lots of things come up. So we've left ourselves quite a bit of time to do that, with the idea that we'll have a draft configuration showing kind of the impact on those cases collected during for consultation in October, so as we go into kind of the new term. And it seems so odd right now to think about planning for something in February 2022. It seems really far off, but it's going to come around really quickly within this project. So once it's been out to consultation and that's all kind of been signed off and we're happy with what that's looking like, Imosphere build the model that sits behind it, so that then when people are entering the needs profile, it will be returning the amount of money. And then there'll be a testing process that just to check that everything is working as expected. And our proposed go live at the moment is 1st of February. So that is what we are aiming for. We've got 11 months to go, and that is what we're aiming for at the moment. So it's pretty much a year project. Next slide, please. So don't have to hear too much more from me. This is my last slide. But I just want to give you a little bit of a flavour of the sorts of things that you'll see us being involved in, and to outline that we don't just go away once things are once everything's live. So during the implementation, we'll be around supporting with the data collection, configuration, production of reports so that people can make good decisions about that configuration. We'll be testing to make sure that things are working as expected. And we'll be trying to support the best practice implementations, providing training and virtual drop-in sessions for the key workers to make sure they're doing everything that they can with those, and supporting with some documentation alongside all of this. So that's during the implementation. But then once things go live, we don't just walk away. It's not a tool that's there. I've talked to you about ongoing sort of developments. But after the go live, we're still about. The idea is that we're there to help bed in the solution, make sure any new users that are using the tool know what they're doing, whether that's sort of enhancing some of the training offers or anything like that. We'll be doing a lot of the virtual drop-ins during the kind of data collection, but we'll continue offering some level of support with that. Obviously, we'd still be about for support. We want to be reviewing how things are working. If there's things that aren't working as well, we want to make sure we can get them working as best we can and as quickly as we can. We do a health check every year, and that is us checking to see how things are working. We follow up with a sort of detailed report with any sort of suggestions about changes that might need to be made. And there's the option to have a couple of updates a year, as I've mentioned before, about sort of inflationary updates for the amounts in each band, or it might be that certain bands aren't working for particular settings. We need to review those in a bit more detail. And then we do have opportunity to sort of share learning with other local authorities, and I think we're hoping to have a bit of an education user group this year as well. So maybe it'll be in person, maybe it'll be virtual. We'll have to see at the time of year for that. So that is it from me. So I'll pass you back to Leslie.
Thanks, Natalie, for that. So just final couple of slides is just letting you know how we're going to be tracking the progress on this project. So we have set up an EBT steering group. At the moment, it just consists of internal LA officers, but we will be expanding that to have schools and parent representatives at it. So the initial meetings are basically creating that huge plan we have so that we can ensure we can be ready for the go live date. So the steering group will at a later stage include school representatives, parents and carers, and of course Atmosphere are part of that. The number of schools representatives that have come forward wanting to be part of that has been overwhelming. We have today over 35 school representatives, hence why we've actually decided to set up an implementation reference group. And basically we will be meeting with them on a monthly basis, keeping them abreast of what we're doing and also using them as our sounding board for any decisions that we're making. What we'll be asking that reference group is that they then decide who will be the key representatives on the steering group, because it would have just been too large a group to have everybody together at one meeting. We will be providing regular updates through School Forum, in the e-bag as before, on the local offer and through the parent carer forums and via your send and inclusion hubs, which I think has been quite a good mechanism to communicate with you of late. So, questions, Nicole. I think Nicole's been gathering some of the questions for us.
Yeah, I've got some questions. I don't know who they're from. I know their names, but not what organisation they're from. So I don't know if they're from the local authority, colleagues or schools. So the first question, will we get a copy of the slides?
Absolutely. We will be publishing these on the local offer with a recording of this session.
Okay. Question 2, are we able to complete this for pupils who are not from Staffordshire?
At the moment, the answer would be no, because this is for children with Staffordshire EHCPs, but I think we could keep that as a potential moving forward. I guess that's from a special school, probably looking at what kind of top-up fees they would be negotiating with that out of authority, local authority placing inside. So I can acknowledge that as being a need within our special schools.
Is this a as well as the EHCP hub, or a step before or instead of?
It's not instead of. At the moment, it's an additional step as part of the work that the SEND key worker will do once the EHCP has been drafted. So it's at that stage they will look at what those questions are and answer them, or where there's been an annual review and there's been a significant change in need, so therefore the funding needs to be addressed. So at the moment, it will sit on Imosphere's platform called CareCalc, but we have the opportunity at a later stage to decide whether we host it within the EHC hub or within our education system, the Capital One database. That isn't a decision we have to take now. We have 2 years to make that decision.
Okay. This would need to tie in closely to the newly drafted annual review document, ideally with single entry with iDocs.
That is if we go down through the EHC hub route. So yes, within the implementation group, we have the SEND assessment team are key members of that group. So we will make sure that's flagged up with them. And we have had those kind of conversations already about how it all links together moving forward.
Okay. Who will be completing the needs profile? Who will be able to see it?
So at the moment, it will be the SEND key workers, will be the key people completing it. Moving forward, we will make the decision about how it's shared wider. I don't know whether Natalie has a view, having worked in other local authorities, but I think for first point during the pilot period where we're gathering the information, it will only be held internally. But I think there is opportunity for that sharing wider, would be my view. But I think that's something we would want to discuss with you as schools.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Leslie, yes, during the sort of pilot stage, data collection stage, it was kept internally while we're kind of refining things, because obviously the needs profile might change. You might change some of the wording and things like that. So, and as one of the process things that I mentioned, definitely a process that's to be discussed is who will see this at what point. So yeah, part for the process is definitely.
Thank you.
Would this need to be completed annually for all EHCP pupils?
No, only where there's been a significant change in their need. But obviously we've got a big ask of our SEND assessment team to complete the current 6,500 EHCPs. And that's where we've got to decide how we implement this moving forward. And that's where I would be going to the reference group to ask their views on this. Is it that we approach all our special schools and we make sure we cover every child in our special schools before the 1st of Feb, or do we do it just where there's a change in need or where there's an EHCNA? But those are decisions we'll need to make as we go forward, and that's where we would be going to the reference group with school representatives to ask their opinions, and obviously would be part of the wider consultation we will be doing in October for all settings.
So a comment, as an annual budget, is this to be paid annually?
And your budgets are paid annually currently, so there would be no change to the current mechanism of payment.
If it's being completed by key workers after an EHCNA annual review, will they be guided by the application only, or will there be a meeting with parents, carers and schools?
My initial view is that the answer to the questions will be guided from what is contained in the EHCP. So if there are needs identified in the plan linked to outcomes, then that's where the funding should be driven from. But that is, again, something we need to discuss and agree as a key principle internally and externally with our reference group.
Will this be used for children going to out of county, independent and non-maintained provision?
Absolutely, it will be used for them, and it will be used as a tool to negotiate what those fees are. And certainly if that independent setting is wanting one-to-one funding additionally, I think it will give us extra evidence base to have those discussions with those providers.
Will there be a minimum funding guarantee for special schools?
There is a minimum funding guarantee for all schools, and that will not change. What we will have to consider is if there's an extra cushion or protection in for schools moving to this system, and that will be something we will consult with you on, because whilst we say this is not a mechanism to save money, there will be winners and losers at both a pupil level and school level, and we need to make sure we protect those schools for that.
Will key workers from the local authority attend the annual reviews to have the best information about the pupils?
It's about what's in the plan that is important. I can't really comment on key workers attending annual reviews. That really sits with the decision on the SEND assessment team, I'm afraid. They have to prioritise which annual reviews they attend.
Can funding be appealed if school settings don't feel they can meet the needs?
Gosh, that one stumped me. I'm afraid I was doing well then. I think there would be a discussion, but we would have to understand why we would be deviating from what that banding tool has given. And I think, as Natalie says, there are opportunities to change the level of funding linked to something exceptional within it. So yes, there are, but I think we'd have to clearly define what they would be moving forward. And I think a lot of this will come out when we do the pilot data and we can start to see what our information is looking like, where our population sits on the various bands and how out of kilter some of the children are. Did you have any comment on that one, Natalie, as well?
I was going to say, it's one of the processes we kind of look at during the process part, about if people don't think it's the right band, what will happen. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are current EHCPs going through this process, or is it only for new EHCPs?
During the pilot period, we will be looking at current EHCPs because that's where we will get the largest breadth of children that we need to put. But as Natalie said, that is not data that we would be sharing. This would be giving us our pilot data information to help us configure what our bands look like in Staffordshire. So yes, children with current plans, we will be taking through this face assessment.
Will data be shared with LMGs about how many pupils at each grading are in their local area?
I would absolutely agree with that. Yes, I think that does form part of our SEND intelligence moving forward. Yeah.
And the SEND hubs, will it be shared? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a good point. Yes.
Does the local authority have the key worker capacity to input this information on an annual basis and share information in the timely manner that would be required?
I think that would be a question for the head of service to answer. But as I said, it will not be on an annual basis. It will only be where there's a significant change in need, and that they will undertake the face assessment while they're undertaking the EHCNA. And advice from Imosphere is very much that adds about 10 to 15 minutes onto their time in drafting the plan.
Is it still possible to join the implementation reference group?
Absolutely. We're not refusing anybody who wants to be part of that. It will all be virtual meetings. You just need to email me direct with your contact details and your role in the school. At the moment, we've got quite a wide variety of people in different roles across the schools.
Will the funding be only for TA hours as they are now?
We will not be quoting what TA hours. It will be a sum of money. So it will be linked to the outcomes that you've detailed in the plan. Is there anything you want to add on that one, Natalie?
No, but I think this is almost like one of the biggest sort of shifts in using this type of tool, of moving away from thinking about hours to thinking about a set of money to support the outcomes that are detailed in the EHCP.
Yeah.
Will AEN funding be available whilst waiting for an EHCP?
I cannot answer that one, but I suspect it will still be available. That is a wider decision making than what this tool is. This tool is literally linked to just the children with plans. So there would be quite a shift from the local authority to suddenly withdraw AEN for children not with plans.
How many bands are there, and will schools have some understanding of the criteria for each band?
Natalie?
There are 11 bands, but depending on the configuration decisions that Staffordshire take, they might have those graduated bands in each one. So it could be that there's A, B, and C in each one, but there are 11 bands.
I've been asked to inquire. Oh, sorry, Natalie.
Sorry, sorry. I was just going to say. I was just reading the question as well. How many bands are there, and will schools have some understanding of the criteria of bands? I think there is something we've got in regards to that, but I think that comes out in the process work that we do.
Thank you. I've been asked to inquire how closely Imosphere will be taking into account work which is currently in progress within the local authority on the local authority's accessibility and SEND strategies.
Well, as we are working as local authority officers within this implementation group, it will be aligned.
Will special schools be informed of funding levels prior to consultation for a pupil placement?
We will have to agree that in our process at the moment.
If the key worker is completing the profile, will they do it alongside school staff? Defining level of risk, etc., is not something that can be done remotely. This would be the procedure in care settings.
Okay, I think again that will have to be taken back and discussed under the process work stream led by the SEND assessment team.
Who will be quality controlling the EHCPs, as these have previously been identified as not good enough?
I'm sorry, but that isn't something I can answer during this session. That would something you would have to raise direct with the head of service, I'm afraid.
When learners move to FE, we've seen a pattern of hours, support and needs being reduced, not pro rata, and not because outcomes have been achieved. How will the banding tool deal with the move to FE?
Natalie, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yes. So in regards to the banding with FE, this is definitely part of the process, and it's sort of the bit we're going to be looking at during the data collection phase. So until we've kind of looked at the data collection phase, we need to understand how it's currently allocated, the types of money that are being allocated for FE, and how it needs to work for further education. So I haven't actually got another answer on that at the moment until we've kind of seen a little bit more detail about how things happen in Staffordshire, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, clearly at the moment with our FE colleagues, their top-up funding is a negotiated figure, I understand, and what funding that they receive. So there is no clear criteria on what they receive. And this was one of the benefits we felt with the banding tool, that we could get some consistency across the top-up funding in the FE sector.
Here's one we've been asked earlier. If the schools feel the tool has allocated too low an amount to meet the child's needs, will there be an appeals process?
There will be an opportunity for you to relook at the responses to the questions, I would have thought, in the face. And I think, as Natalie said, I recall you sharing where a head teacher had appealed in another authority, and the head teacher completed the face assessment themselves and came up with the same level of funding.
Yes, that is something that one of our local authorities did.
Yeah.
But again, I'd say it's part of the kind of process that we'll talk about appeals and what happens if people think it's too low.
Yeah. And I think this will all be, when we've got further down the line in this year, we'll understand a lot more of this clearer. We'll be able to include these things in the consultation that we have out in the October to gain your views on how we move forward with those decisions.
Will this leave pupils without a school place, as the algorithm does not identify enough funding to access a specialist place?
A specialist place? I don't know the answer to that. because the idea is the algorithm will identify the right level of needs, right level of funding to meet the needs of that child and the outcomes identified. So it does go back to, is what's detailed in the plan correct? And it almost goes back to that quality assurance of our plans being good enough to attach the right level of funding to them.
Okay, here's one that I think you covered earlier. If funding for existing EHCPs reduce as a result of the use of the tool, existing staff hours may be negatively affected. This could leave schools financially burdened due to protected pay. How will schools be supported with this?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we would be looking at a protection, and I think that's something that we would be including in the consultation about what that protection looks like, in addition to the MFG, which is a statutory part of the funding.
Is it possible that there will be a move to issuing EHCPs without any funding at all, as we've seen in neighbouring authorities?
I don't think Staffordshire quotes funding in our current EHCPs, to my knowledge. I don't know if anybody from the SEN team can respond to that. I don't think we actually quote any figures. We quote hours in our mainstream, and I think we may quote a matrix level, but again, that matrix level figure can change year on year.
Helen's from the SEN team has got her hand up.
Okay,
on this
Helen.
one.
Thank you, Helen.
Was the question about other authorities though? So I think some authorities
sorry.
do give a
Have I
plan, but don't actually give funding to school. At the moment, if the funding level isn't above 6,000, we don't give a plan in this authority.
Okay.
FE providers will also be able to join the reference group, won't they?
They are already a member. We have a couple of FE providers already on. But by all means, if you wish to join, you're more than welcome. But we have currently over 35 school representatives on the reference group, going across specials, mainstream, across primary, middle, FE. And as I said, we have 6 parent carer representatives already on the group.
What constitutes a significant change of need which would trigger the need for this tool to be used, e.g. requests for an increase in hours? How many hours would it need to be for?
It wouldn't be about increasing in hours that would change. It would be actually in the annual review stage where something needs to be changed in terms of the needs of the child or the outcomes. That would when the FACE assessment would be revisited to see if the funding level changed. It wouldn't be a request from a school saying, can I have 5 more hours TA support? Because that's what this is not about. It's about a needs-led approach to funding.
Okay, what other local authorities already use this banding tool?
So there are a number of London authorities and another Shire authority, or 2, is it, Natalie? There's a couple more about to move into it,
Yeah.
like Staffordshire.
I think there's 7 in total.
Will the current expectation that schools fund the first 6,000 of support continue?
That is a national remit, not a Staffordshire. So yes, unless the government change those plans.
If the tool doesn't take into account healthcare needs, how will we continue to meet the needs of students where the high needs block funding is currently paying to support significant health needs to enable the student to access a school placement?
I think we'd have to unpick that a little bit further on what there are elements within the FACE assessment around health. If I'm right, Natalie, you'll probably remember it better than myself.
There are, yeah.
So there are, and I think I'd need to unpick a particular instance you're talking about, whoever raised that. So if you would like to email me that one direct, so I can just unpick it a little bit further, because that could well be a risk we need to identify in the project.
I was going to say, Leslie, it'd be really worth us having a look when we're looking at some of the data collection cases, having a couple of these cases just to see how they fit.
Absolutely, yeah. So whoever that was, if you could contact me direct, I'd be grateful.
Is this a national algorithm that identifies fair funding for SEND across the UK, or just Staffordshire?
It is international. It's an algorithm that has been developed, as Natalie said, by Imosphere, an independent company. working alongside head teachers, ed psych, SALT over the last 5 years, and where it's been introduced in a number of other authorities. So just to give some perspective about this, when we first came across this banding toolkit, we actually had Imosphere come into Staffordshire and give a presentation to a small group of LA officers and school forum members. And the outcome from that meeting was very positive in terms of wanting to move this forward.
Will there be a consultation with parents regarding the changes? Many parents look at the hours allocation for their child. Now it will be an amount. This may confuse the system for some.
Yeah, there has to be a very careful comms communication with the parents, and we will be working with the Parent Carer Forum on that.
Naomi, the locality manager from East Staffs and Burton, has confirmed that we don't quote figures in the EHCPs. Thanks, Naomi. How does the algorithm take into account the parental preferences around education for their pupil, which is protected in law?
Natalie?
Yeah, so I was going to say there's a question in there that asks about planned education setting going forward. So that would obviously have taken into consideration obviously the parents' preferences, because at the point it's being used, it would have already had that information, so you'll be able to choose what type of setting it would be. In regards to type, I know sometimes it comes into discussion about the particular school, and that will just be a process that will have to be looked at as part of this.
Okay. The London boroughs are very well funded. Can Staffordshire afford this?
And that's where it comes, and it becomes a very localised decision making. So that's the key bit in the plan that Natalie showed on an earlier slide around how we actually match it to Staffordshire's high needs block. I cannot magic additional funding from anywhere. We all know the pressures Staffordshire faces across its high needs block, but what we want to achieve is that it's a fairer and consistent approach to allocating top-up funding for all our children, and that's the key thing. I think the conversation around the shortfall of funding in Staffordshire is much wider than this. Thank you, Melsa.
Okay, that's all
it.
the questions. Apologies if I've missed anybody. If you want to pop it again in, just as I was saying, but if you've got questions that I may have missed as we've gone through, please add them again at the bottom of the chat. But will this be designed to dovetail with the continuing healthcare funding?
Okay, so at the very beginning of this, we had conversations with our health colleagues around utilising the tool, because there are other tools that Imosphere deliver across health for children and top-up funding and social care. At the moment, our Staffordshire health colleagues are quite content with the system they have for allocating funding for continuing healthcare, so it isn't an option for us, unfortunately, at Staffordshire, but it may well be something we want to consider for the social care side. Perhaps what I didn't share at the very beginning is that we actually use this tool for our adult social care in Staffordshire. So we've been working with Imosphere for a number of years as the wider local authority. So this is the first time we're branching out into children's element of top-up funding. Okay, I think that's it about questions time. Hopefully most people have, oh no, there's another one. I know they're coming.
You've got a couple more there.
Yeah, Natalie, at the beginning there would be an hours equivalent with the total budget. Would this be on the plan or the total figure? We've still got to decide whether the quoting the hours within the banding tool output report is something we want to consider in Staffordshire. So again, as I said, there's a lot of the questions you're asking. There'll be things that we'll be able to unpick as we start to look at our data and start to do that pilot phase and speak with the reference group and share that output with them.
A final question. If an annual review has been brought forward due to the child now having significantly higher needs, will there be any difference in annual review templates to complete?
I think that will be picked up in the process element with the SEND assessment team, because obviously I know that they're doing some work on the annual reviews anyway.
That's it for the questions.
Okay, thank you very much for all attending. It's been lovely to see so many of you here. You know where we are if you've got any questions, but I'm hoping that the comms plan that we put in place will make sure you're all kept up to date and up to speed with how we move forward in this project. We've got quite a lot to pull off in a short space of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.